Hello, and welcome back to Tom Talks 2. I'm your host, Tom, and today I'm speaking to Michael Busuttil, host of the Ranger Danger podcast and the editor/designer of the hit image comic series Radiant Black. Today, we'll be discussing what it is exactly an editor does at Image Comics, as well as the work that goes into designing a book touted as a superhero comic for a new generation. So, Michael, to kick things off, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I did not have breakfast this morning. Sometimes I have breakfast, but I did not have breakfast this morning. So the first thing I ate was a hamburger for lunch.
That's fair enough, yeah. I think you are the first person on the show who hasn't had breakfast, so you're making history right here, a trailblazer.
If I'd have known, I'd have eaten breakfast. What's the best breakfast anyone's ever eaten?
I think the one that caught me most off guard was probably just bread. I think someone had like 3 slices of bread for breakfast, and that was
just not toast, just
no,
bread.
yeah, plain bread with I think he said with spread, but he didn't specify what spread, and that was at like 2 p.m. So
it's very mysterious to not specify what spread.
I thought so too. I definitely thought so too. But I didn't ask to elaborate. I should have found out more. I failed as a journalist there. But
you can do a follow-up interview with whoever that was. That's fine.
Yeah, good show. All right. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Michael Busuttil. I'm a comics designer / editor. Most famous books I'm on at the moment are probably Radiant Black at Image. I'm also on a book called Ordinary Gods. And we just announced books called Supermassive and Rogue Sun. That's my... I think that's everything that I'm on that's been announced. But I've got a couple of... I have a list next to my desk so that I don't forget books that I'm working on. That's everything that's been announced, yeah.
Wow. Well, what a few to be announced though. Like, quite the lineup.
Yeah, we're having fun.
Yeah, no, you can tell. Yeah, an awesome lineup. But since you're the first editor on Tom Talks 2, would you mind describing to me and the audience what exactly the role of editor entails in comic books?
Sure. I think before I start describing it, I should say, because I do most of my work on books at Image Comics, where there's a slightly different setup to like a Marvel or a DC, my job is a little different to an editor at Marvel or DC is. So every editor's job is slightly different in the world of comics, and mine is no exception. Broadly speaking, I sort of describe my job as trying to help the other members of the creative team do their job as most effectively as possible. And so sometimes that involves things like, finding out our deadlines, making sure we've got enough time for everyone to have plenty of time to work on it. Sometimes it's helping talk out like a layout problem or a dialogue problem or a big story planning problem. Sometimes it's going in and building spreadsheets out to track how many pages of whatever is someone working on. Sometimes it's, I'm also a designer, so sometimes it's like laying out the inside front cover and sending those files to press. Yeah, but it's helping. Helping is what my job is, in any way that I can help.
So, your job as editor is helper, you'd say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
enough.
well, so, like I said, like if I was at Marvel or DC, that's sort of more of like a in charge position, right? Like an editor at Marvel hires a writer, hires an artist, hires a letterer, knows what book they want and tells people to put it together. I work for creative teams that are already together, that already have an idea of what the book is. And my job is just trying to get them to the clearest and best version of that book.
Okay, because I've always wondered, because from what I understand about how it works at Image, the artist, or the writer, has to like find the creative team himself, and is that true for the editor as well, or does Image assign an editor to a book?
Yeah, no, I am Kyle hired me to work on Radiant Black, and Ryan hired me to work on Rogue Sun. I work for the creative teams
Got you.
is broadly true. Like, look, the folks at Image know who I am. Like, I have a lot of communication with them at all times in my job as editor, but they don't like they don't pay me. They don't hire me. The creative teams do that.
Got you. Okay, that's interesting. So, how would someone kind of, or like at least how did you fall into the role of editor in the first place in this industry?
Entirely by accident. Well, sort of. Okay, so here is my advice for how to become an editor. And what I want to preface this with is this will not work for you because it should not have worked for me.
All right.
So, start a Power Rangers podcast. You know Power Rangers, the children's television show from the 90s?
All right. Step one. Yeah.
So, you start a Power Rangers podcast with one of your closest friends in the world.
Okay.
You do that for several years, like 100 people listen to it. It's not like a popular podcast. It's just a podcast that you do. Eventually, Boom will hire Kyle Higgins to write their reboot of the Power Rangers comics. One of your listeners tweets at Kyle and says, hey, you should go on this podcast. Kyle comes on our podcast. We interview him once. It goes really well. He says, hey, we'd like to do a podcast every month. Like, I'd like to do like a director's commentary behind the scenes of the book. So we say, yes, of course, Mr. Kyle Higgins, you're very famous. We did that for years and years. I mean, he was on the book for 30 issues. I did the Boom Room for 3 or 4 years or something.
Right.
And the truth is that eventually you spend that much time talking to someone about how stories work and how their process works. And eventually they start giving you looks behind the scenes and like, you know, I at that point don't know that I would consider myself a Power Rangers expert, but like if you have ideas, you can't just ask the fans. And your editor has a different perspective because she's not necessarily the biggest Power Rangers fan in the world. But here's these two friendly ears. So, you know, Kyle asks us stuff and pitches stuff to us and tests stuff on it. And eventually, it really happened for Matt first. Kyle was like, hey, Matt, do you want to write comics? And Matt said, yes, absolutely. And so we all made Self-Made together a couple of years ago. And then Matt and Kyle are currently writing Ultraman together at Marvel and all of that sort of thing. But I'm the organized guy. Like, I have the spreadsheet for the podcast. I helped build the spreadsheet of all the Power Rangers who were in this massive crossover event and like where they were and who was dead and all of that sort of thing. And like at university, I edited a couple of sort of like big class projects together. Like, this is very much not a shock transition for me. But it just so happened that at the start of, I want to say about the start of last year, Kyle just said like, hey, I'm doing Radiant Black. Will you edit it? And I said to him, I don't know what that is, but I didn't have another job at the time. And so, yeah, sure, why not? Let's work it out. And now I'm on 8 or 9 different books.
That's so cool.
It's nuts. The thing is, every step that I just described at the time, I was like, yeah, sure, this is a sensible next thing to happen. If you sit here and look back at the last 4 years, it's unthinkable.
So you said you wouldn't recommend this for other people.
I mean, they're welcome to try it. If it works for them, great. I can't imagine it will work again.
Okay. That's so cool though. I think it just goes to show that, like, you know, if you're passionate about something though, like, you know, if you do it for long enough, like, people will take notice and, like, you know, good things will happen.
It's worked for me so far. I kind of have this attitude towards all the stuff that we're making, which is like, at some point, I feel like an adult is going to show up and they're going to be like, no, you can't let this guy design and edit the comics. He's never done it before. That's insane. And so every month it's just like, well, they let us do another one. Let's make it as good as we can.
That's so sick. I think, like, especially as someone like me, who, like, as part of Coco Comics, you know, who we're all like kind of doing it ourselves and giving it a shot, to hear that, like, it could potentially lead to stuff is pretty inspiring. I wanted to ask, like, you said that you do the design work as well.
Yep.
Just like a real quick question. With design work, does that mean that, like, with the volume cover for Radiant Black and stuff, like, how much of the cover is, like, your work? Obviously, other than the artwork itself. Is that mostly your work?
Yeah, on the cover of, like, Radiant Black Volume 1, so the Radiant Black single issues have a logo that was designed by a guy called Rich Bloom. He's a longtime collaborator of Kyle's. And that was one of the things... This is one of the things that's kind of weird about my sort of freelance editor thing. Like, the logo already existed when I came on the book. I'm a designer. I can design a logo for a book, but there was already a logo for this one. And it was only that, like... I like the logo a lot. It can be a little tricky to work with in certain contexts. So I did a different version, and we were maybe going to use it on single issues, and we maybe weren't. We decided to keep the existing one on single issues. But the logo on Volume 1 is my version of Rich's logo. So anything that isn't the artwork is me. And that's sort of a good, like... That's generally true in single issues of Radiant Black as well. Like, inside front cover, inside back cover, design pages of any sort. That's me. If it's artwork, it's Marcelo and Becca and maybe a colorist.
Cool. Okay. Because I love that cover. It stands out so cool.
The piece of artwork is so, like, stunning. It's Marcelo did a version for our first issue. It was a storyboard for our pre-release trailer. And it it punched us both in the gut, and they were like, hey, can you add an extra cover? And we went, yes, it's going to be this. And then we knew that had to be Volume 1, and Marcelo just revised it slightly. I will say Volume 2 is going to match it, but it's going to be a bit different.
Okay, I think I can imagine, but without spoilers, like, I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
but,
you can't predict what the number 3 cover is going to be, though. Trust me, you can't.
All right. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. No, yeah, because it's interesting because, like, yeah, like with the Coco stuff, like I was saying, it's pretty much the same for me as well. With like editing and designing, like the covers on the anthologies and stuff. Like the artwork isn't mine, but then everything surrounding it usually is. So it's cool to hear that I'm not completely off the mark with how it works in industry.
No, it's exactly like that. And if I'm lucky, the artist had a template, like had seen the logo, knows what space they've got to leave. Yeah. If I'm unlucky, they didn't, and you put a stroke on the logo and you hope you make it work. But that's part of the job.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just looking through the covers here. So sick. Like, yeah, all of the design work inside as well. Like the it kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than like kind of like Apple core. Like
it's very much. I sent Kyle this email that he like referred to in a whole bunch of interviews, and if I'd known it was going to be this important to him, I wouldn't have sent it from my bed at 11 o'clock at night. But it was just, we were talking about design, and Kyle he was like, what if it looked like this or this or this or this? And I was just like, okay, here's where we are. We've made a poster. There's a poster going out, and it says like the superhero comic for the new generation. And wow, that's a lot of pressure to live up to, right? Is that the one? Yeah, it's got a quote from Robert Kirkman up the top. It says, the perfect comic for anyone missing Invincible. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. We've made 3 issues so far. That's a lot, Rob. Thank you. And I was just like, okay, it can't look like the 80s. Like, Kyle is a kid from that era, like going into the 90s. I'm a little younger than him, but like, a lot of those Super Sentai, those sort of tokusatsu influences are from that era. And I was just like, no, if they've said it's for the new generation, it has to look modern. It has to look now, and it has to be a comic for 2020, for 2021.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, truly the Radiant Black aesthetic is kind of just my default.
Got you.
Like, I cheated on Radiant Black, right? Like, the logo is a big sans serif tightly tracked, tightly lettered. Like, it's just what I like. And so when I'm in trouble, I just go like, well, what do I want it to look like? And it just can look like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it works. Like you said, it's the whole pitch is like, yeah, a superhero for the next generation. So giving it this sort of clean, I don't know, like it sort of like gives me like, I don't know if this is like a weird comparison, like the Hickman X-Men stuff. It sort of reminds me a little bit of that, like the without the graphs and stuff, like the cleanness of it, like the sleekness, like it feels like you're reading it on a screen even when you're not. I think is like how I would describe it. But it all looks great. Like it's something I noticed about the book immediately was like the design work just came together really well and like yeah suits the tone of it all.
Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, the Hickman X-Men relaunch came out just as we were like putting all of this stuff together.
Got you.
And it was very much, I was reading it, Kyle was reading it, I think Matt and Ryan were both reading it. And we were just like in group chats like, oh my god, he's like, they're doing it. Like they're finally, why doesn't every book look like this? Why doesn't every book feel like this? And it was like, it was actually hard having seen Tom Muller's incredible design work on that book to be like, well, now it can't just be that. Like, that's what I want every book to look like, but we can't do that. So grabbing bits of that and going like, okay, let's take some other influences, add them to the blender, and try and come up with our own thing. But like, no, a huge fan of Tom. That is an incredible compliment to me.
Well, yeah, no problem. Like I said, it looks great.
Thank you.
Oh, there was something that came up there. Oh, something about you said that you were working on the pitch when the Hickman X-Men stuff began. And I'd be interested to hear actually, like, again, because you're the first editor. I get all my like editing questions out of here.
Yeah, go
like,
for it.
How much of Radiant Black was in the initial pitch? If that makes sense, like how much of, because I'm caught up, like I've read issue 9, but like where was the pitch up to when you presented it?
That's a great part of a real problem. So this is going to sound like a negative, but I really don't mean it that way. Part of being friends with Kyle is that you are kind of on all of his books.
Right.
Like, Kyle will talk to the people that he is friends with about all of his projects. Yeah. There's books that I am not on that I know lots about because, like, it's the stuff he's working on. He's excited to talk about it. I'm his friend.
Yeah.
So I heard a lot about Radiant Black and stages before it was Radiant Black, but I don't remember at what point he was like, hey, be on the book. So I know it was approved at Image. It had been greenlit, so it was going to happen. That means there were preview pages, which was the scene of them in the first issue, like coming out of the bar, discovering the Radiant. Those 5 pages. I think including the transformation double page spread and the suit reveal. I think like that chunk.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably it. And I know there were bigger ideas beyond like where it could go than that. But I feel like I definitely feel like am I safe to spoil Radiant Black?
Yeah. We'll put like a warning saying like if you haven't caught up, this is not
so
safe.
Spoilers for issue 4.
Yeah.
I remember like Kyle coming to me and being like, we are going to kill the main character. I remember that. So that didn't exist yet, which I think means
that wasn't in the pitch.
Yes, it was early.
Okay.
I must have been, because that's issue 4. So
yeah,
there must have been not a lot when I came on.
Got you.
And that's different. Like Rogue Sun, which we've just announced. Like Ryan had a very tight pitch for the first 6-issue arc. And I read that was already in place and the book was approved after I came on. So like different artists, different teams work slightly differently. I think this was a case where like Kyle sort of pitches a little looser and wanted to find it. This is Ryan's first Image book, so he wanted to know what he was doing going in.
Mm.
Yeah, but it depends. But yeah, on Radiant Black, it was very early on that I came in.
Yeah, because I was reading it, because I started reading it, not gonna lie, because of that Kirkman quote. Like, I binged...
That's why we get the quotes. That's what they're for.
I binged Invincible, and then I saw that quote, like the comic, like I literally, like in a week, you know, like my entire week, literally my entire life, like, you know, like straight out of the shower, like as soon as I wake up, was just all of Invincible over the course of a week, just before the animated series launched, and then Radiant Black came out, or might have just come out, and I started reading it, and I was like, yeah, okay, cool, like, you know, cool suit, cool like antics and stuff, and then issue 4 dropped, and I remember thinking like, oh, like this is the book, like,
yes.
you know, like I don't know if that makes sense. There's sort of like a moment in every book, like the Omni-Man stuff, you know, where you realize, oh, this is the book, like this.
Yeah, which is, in retrospect, makes it so funny that wasn't the book. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's so weird.
It really very much, I think, was... I know that we had that in place when issue 1 came out.
Got you.
Like,
yeah.
we were that much ahead. Because I definitely remember reading reviews of issue 1, and especially people on Twitter being like, I'm going to give it till issue 3 and I'm see how it goes. And me being like, oh, please give it to issue 4. Please give it... If you give it to issue 4, I promise you'll give us issue 5.
Yeah.
And I know what the end of issue 5 is. You'll give us, like... But you got to give us till 4. And I think luckily enough people gave us till 4. So
yeah.
I think people are on board now.
Yeah, no, it's like that whole issue. I remember getting to the end of it and thinking like, wow, this book is not what I thought it was, you know, like at all. I remember my initial like thoughts was that Marshall was gonna get like a radiant like evil whatever, you know, like some other like race would come to him and be like, kill the Radiant Black, like, you know, you want superpowers, right? And then like,
I think that was my assumption as well, to be honest. Like, it's... Kyle likes discovering things as he goes. Like, it's, you know, Kyle comes from a sort of like, he wrote Nightwing at DC. Like, that was very much they're not going to cancel Nightwing. So you just like, you can sort of work out what the next couple of issues of Nightwing are and do that, and then work it out beyond that and do that. And it's... I will be honest and say it is not the way that I personally would work if I was doing the book. But it's working, so it's tough for me to argue with.
Yeah, no, it's just it's hard to even imagine like going into Radiant Black like as on the creative team and not knowing that issue 4 is issue 4.
Yep.
No, yeah, crazy, but that's awesome. Yeah, no, I just remember that reveal is like definitely what got me like, all right, this is cool, you know, like this is something something special. But yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, because yeah, I know that you know, every writer, every editor like works differently in that way. Something about like the editing as well, like, because you do is let me like try and phrase it better. When it comes to like editing, like, how much has there been anything with the story so far that you could tell me, like, where you said to Kyle like, oh, what if you do this? What if you do that? Maybe you should try this. Or is it been mostly Kyle sort of his vision?
That's an interesting question. There have been a couple of moments. They're mostly small. The ending of issue 3, where he like goes out and helps some people like whose car is stuck in the snow.
Yeah,
it was something totally different, and I was just I just read it and it was wrong, and I don't, you know, the book is Kyle and Marcello's, and so if they wanted whatever they want to do, I want to support them in what they do, even if the book doesn't have to be for me. It's not my book, but this was wrong for the book. And so I wrote, Kyle mostly gets very short emails from me, but occasionally they will get very long emails from me, where it's like, okay, I've thought about it. It has to be, they have to save, someone has to tweet because we've set up the Twitter, and he has to go out and he has to save a family from something. It has to be like this. And that's the main thing where I think, like, there's some stuff coming up in issue 11, which is not out yet, so I won't spoil what it is. But as we were brainstorming it, I remember we came away from a call, we were like, this is going to be the direction. And I was just sitting here, I'm up later than everyone else because I'm in Australia, and I was sitting here late at night, and I just went, I think there's something more interesting. How about this direction instead? And I think that is sort of more the sort of email I tend to send. It's not like, no, I refuse, because frankly, if they want to do it, I actually don't have any power to stop part of the book happening. But what I can say is, like, I think it's more interesting if, and then all I can do is leave that with them and see if they agree with me or not.
Yeah, I get you, yeah. It must be tough, right? Like, was Radiant Black, sorry, like, did you say this was your first book that you've edited?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to ask, like, did you find it, like, tough? Like when you thought it was going, or like when there was ideas that you weren't sure about, saying like, hey, maybe we should do something else? Or did you have such like a relationship with Kyle at that point that you were kind of cool with it?
That's definitely part of it. Like, I've known Kyle for 20. I slept on his couch in 2018, so longer than that, definitely. Yeah. And so part of that is just, I guess to me, and this is maybe proven wrong by the fact that I'm doing, like, no one kind of cares who the editor is. And I say that no one's supposed to care who the editor is, right? Like, that's like knowing who the producer is on an album. If you're a super fan and they're super famous, you might know, like, the most famous producer. But no one buys the latest Taylor Swift album and is like, oh, this was produced by... That doesn't... So if people didn't like the book, or if people don't like a decision, it's kind of out of my... like, it's out of my hands, but also no one's going to associate it with me, so I don't mind.
Right, got you.
It's funny. I don't mind being behind the scenes like that. Like, it doesn't bother me. The book has a lot of people like that, like our production people at Image, or the marketing people at Image. Like, there's lots of people, our printer doesn't get named in the book, but without that person, the book does not get to store shelves.
Yeah.
And so I'm all right being one of those people and not one of the other people. That's all right with me.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I guess, because, like, I definitely find it tough, personally, and I think a lot of people can relate, if, like, a friend comes to me with, like, an idea, and they're like, oh, and like, this happens, and that happens, and, like, and it ends like this. Like, I find it really, I'm just like, like, cool, like, that sounds neat, even if I have, like, thoughts, because you don't want to be like, well, like, this, that, the other, like, I think you should change this, I think this is our character for this guy. But I guess when it's, like, your literal job, you probably like, suck it up.
What I am getting good at is saying how I feel and then letting it go.
Got you.
Like, if I think it sucks, I'll say that, and if they say actually we like it, then fine, that's fine. It's not my book, it's your book.
I guess that's you need that skill in this line of work, I suppose. Like, again, like you said, if it's not your book, getting caught up on ideas that aren't even yours, like, it's just not worth the energy, I guess, like, at the end of the day.
One day I will have a book of my own, maybe, and I will drive that editor absolutely furious.
It reminds me of, I think the most famous, like, editor story I know in comics is about Watchmen with the squid. I can't remember who the original editor was, I'm blanking right now. They hated the squid so much that they left the book. Like, they didn't want, that entire last issue to happen before it was, like, crap. And then, like, Alan and Dave were both like, no, well, we're doing it anyway, and then they left. I can't remember who it is, but I wonder if that editor still looks at that and is like, I hate that squid, like, that sucks.
I bet that happens. Like, there's parts where I look back at old issues of Radiant Black and other stuff that I've worked on, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't have done that. But it's done now. Once the book is printed, it exists. So there's no point getting... when I was just a fan and not a professional, I always used to hear, we'd do interviews with Kyle and we would be like, so the next issue is out on this day. And someone would say like, oh, I didn't know it was out then or whatever. And I'd be like, how do you not know when your book is out?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get it. And having been on multiple comics for a year, it's because the second it goes to the printer, it has to leave your mind, because there's the next 6 issues are in various stages of like, one's being written, one's being drawn, one's going to solicits, one's at the printer. You cannot think about an issue once it's out of your hands.
That's interesting. Yeah, like, yeah, I guess you straight up do not have like the time or energy to worry about an issue that you can't change at this point.
Yeah, I think issue 10 of Radiant Black is out a week after we're recording this.
Yeah.
But if it's out the week after, or if it came out yesterday, that doesn't matter, because we've got to get issue 12 finished first.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, issue 10 is the Blacklight issue, right?
It is. I got my comps this morning, actually.
Oh, awesome. How does it look?
Well, I don't have a blacklight, so I haven't tested that. But one of the members of the creative team has a blacklight, took a bunch of photos. It looks really good. I'm really happy.
I think I saw those on Twitter, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen more photos than the one. I actually had to ask Kyle to stop sending me photos because I have other stuff to do and I don't need more photos of a book that I own a copy of.
Yeah.
But it looks good and we're really happy with it, and I think it's going to blow people away.
That's really cool. Where did the idea for that come from?
I think Kyle saw a poster somewhere. If I'm remembering right, Kyle was like at a convention, saw a blacklight poster. I was like, we should do a blacklight issue. And, we knew that we were going to do this sort of going into an alternate dimension story. And that was just like, well, it should be weird, right? Like, it should be weird and different and unusual. And so if we're going to do a blacklight issue, let's do it there.
This is the one to do it for, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah, because I remember seeing, the channel Cartoonist Kayfabe?
Yes, absolutely.
Jim Rugg and Ed. I remember Jim Rugg did a blacklight comic, and I remember he kept saying, like first ever blacklight comic, and I remember seeing, like, the Radiant Black one, and I was wondering, like, I don't know if it was like that the idea for the Radiant Blacklight comic was in your head beforehand, or if you even knew about Jim Rugg's comic. But
I actually I'm not a huge like YouTube channel guy.
Yeah.
But I do know that Kyle watched a bunch of episodes of that show in particular. And I'm sure that he tweeted about Jim Rugg like yesterday or the day before. So I do believe that was, if that wasn't the genesis of the idea, that was definitely something afterwards was like, okay, let's see who's done this before. I just don't remember the order exactly.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I just remember talking to a mate about it being like, do you think they're gonna put like second ever blacklight comic on the cover?
We should have. I find that very funny, so we probably should have. But then cool. Someone would write to us and be like, actually, this is the third one. And you'd have to pulp the whole print run and start again.
God. Yeah. Not worth the effort, fair enough.
No.
All right. You mentioned earlier about Supermassive.
Yeah.
A crossover event. I think you announced it like this week, or like might have been last week.
Late last week, I think.
Got
maybe.
You. Yeah. I remember seeing the 2nd of February. Well, was it 22nd of February? No.
Well, we're hoping for the 2nd, but print production and logistics at the moment are a nightmare. So Image have been very good so far. We're aiming for the 2nd, but if we miss the 2nd, I'm not going to feel too bad because it's happening to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. So hopefully the 2nd of February.
Yep.
A crossover between Radiant Black, Rogue Sun, and Inferno Girl Red? Yep,
that's the one.
Wonderful. Now, I'm really, really interested to hear how this came about. Were these characters, I assume probably not, but were they conceived to be in the same universe from the get-go, or is this something that happened after the fact?
So, I should preface this by saying this crossover has been in the works basically all of this year. Like I don't remember the date, but I want to say like February we had the first call about putting this thing together. They were, I think that I can say that they were not originally. I don't know what the deal with Rogue Sun was, because I wasn't on that book right at the start, like before it was greenlit. I don't remember if that was always, let's do it in a crossover sort of way, or if it got approved and then we said, well, it could exist in the same universe. But it was very much so. We knew that Radiant Black was going to, like, you know, Radiant Black had just come out, basically. Matt had been working on this pitch. Matt's been working on Inferno Girl Raid for maybe 2 years in different forms before getting the Kickstarter up and running earlier this year. So we knew we had that. We knew Ryan had this book. Like, Kyle and Ryan have known each other for, I think, a decade. Matt and I have known each other for a decade. We've all known each other for 4 or 5 years on Power Rangers stuff.
Got you.
And it very much... what I think happened is Radiant Black was going to come out, and a bunch of places for some reason started publishing articles like, is this the beginning of a new Image superhero universe?
Yeah.
And the answer was no. We had Radiant Black, but that was it. Like, Matt had a book, but it was unrelated, and it was a sort of standalone thing. Ryan had a book that he was working on, but who knew? And then we just sort of went, but what if it was, though? Like, what if we did a crossover? And, okay, well, February is the end of the first year of Radiant Black, so that's a good time to, like, do a sort of celebration thing. And, February is the 30th anniversary of Image Comics.
Oh, well, there you go.
Like, that's the time to do a big, like... Image books have expanded to include thousands of different stories and genres and types of things, but it all started with, like, people doing creator-owned superhero books. And so 30 years on, why don't we just do something big and nuts and fun and just a big dumb crossover? And then there was a period where Rogue Sun would launch before it, but then we needed a little more time sorting some stuff out before it would come out. So it became, well, okay, what if it launches after it? And now, well, Rogue Sun is the story of this kid whose dad dies, and it turns out that his dad, who he never saw, who has another family, was the biggest superhero in the city. So... well, what if instead of it being him, what if it was his dad in the crossover? Because he hasn't died yet.
Right.
And so all of a sudden that sort of thing opens up like, here is our story. And then we there's a bad guy and they do some stuff. Like, it's fun. It's a big fun crossover.
That's cool. Yeah, very Sentai, you know, like the, I remember seeing an article that was like, you know, in true, you know, sort of fashion, you know, introducing characters in a crossover and then spinning them off.
Yeah, I mean, it will not shock anyone to, like, I've had a Power Rangers podcast for 8 years. Kyle and Ryan and Matt and I, in fact, have all written for Boom's Power Rangers line.
Yeah.
Like, that stuff is, at this point, baked into us in a pretty serious way.
Yeah.
And so when we were talking about a crossover, I was like, this is our Sentai team-up movie. That's what we have to do.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm always curious about how these things come together. I remember, actually, when Radiant Black got announced, right, and there was that, again, it was like New Generation Superheroes, the Kirkman quote, you know, there was a lot of hype around it. I remember seeing a theory online that looks funny in hindsight, that Radiant Black was going to be the first story in the Spawn universe line. And
wow.
I remember seeing that because people thought, well, Todd probably wants to do things other than Spawn, right? Maybe he's, like, launching a book that's a completely new superhero, you know, like, in the same universe as Spawn.
I love Todd. It turns out he wants to do Spawn with
Spawn.
a funny hat, and
Yes, yeah.
Spawn is a cop, I think. And like what they want to do is a couple of books that are more Spawn. And honestly, it's worked for him for 30 years. More power to the guy.
Yeah, no, I just remember thinking like, oh wow, what a cool idea. But
No,
um,
it's a different thing, but that's
yeah,
okay. I don't
yeah.
mind being a different thing.
Oh,
And
I think that,
listen, one day if Todd is like, "Hey, do you want to put Spawn in a Radiant Black or Radiant Black in a Spawn?" I'd have that conversation.
that'd
We
be
haven't
sick.
had it yet, but I mean, he's been going for a long time. He must be onto something.
That's gotta happen. I'd love to see that. That'd be so cool. Yeah, no, I think it was because of the in issue 1. There's like a savage dragon on the TV.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that was Kyle talked to Eric Larson and was like,
a
"Hey, can we put?" Because I think there was definitely conversation about, well, there's already existing Image superhero universes. Like,
mhm,
is this one of them? And
mhm.
I don't know if we ever quite decided. Like, maybe Savage Dragon exists up the road. We haven't seen him yet, but he's in Chicago. It could happen. I like
Yeah,
my attitude towards that stuff is always like, yeah, when we get to it, if it happens, then it happens, and if not, then not. Like,
yeah,
let's just we'll keep doing our book and making it as good as possible, and if we get to do some fun team ups and stuff, then we can do that when we get to it.
yeah. Like it's not canon until it's printed. It's sort of
Yeah.
the good attitude to have for sure. Yeah, no, I'm super looking forward to Supermassive. It's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, I mean we're hard at work on it, so I would love to say that it's done, and I really like it's still in progress, but
mhm,
I'm really happy with what's happened so far. The script is really fun. It's what I wanted it to be, and that is
mhm.
what makes me happy.
That's cool. I do have like some questions about the design work that comes into play
Sure.
with the editing work that you do as well. I'm really curious because now you're editing, yeah, Supermassive, Rogue Sun, and Radiant Black. All the same universe. Is there a level of responsibility on your end, or do you find a level of responsibility on your end to make sure the books look cohesive in universe with each other? Um, or is that not really something that you consider?
It's funny because it's almost the opposite. I
Right.
think like as I said earlier, Radiant Black is very much like my style. It's
Mm.
what my sort of it's not quite there because I would have a bit more Helvetica, but Kyle has particular feelings about anyway. Um it's important to me like Rogue Sun and Radiant Black we're saying they exist in the same universe.
Yeah,
But outside of the crossover that we're doing, these two books don't cross over.
got you.
If you are not interested in Radiant Black, but you think Rogue Sun sounds great, you can read that book. You won't miss anything.
Hmm.
If you are reading Radiant Black, you don't want to pick up another book, you're not interested in Rogue Sun, you're not going to miss anything not reading that. Like, I'd like it if you read both of them. I think they're really good books, but it's important to me that people don't. I think you can end up with a level of fatigue of like, oh, now I've got to read 7 books just
Yeah.
to keep track of what's going on. Like
Mm.
these are, and I mean, especially because, different writers and artists working at different paces, like coordinating that sort of thing in one universe. I can't do that. I can't make that
Mm.
work. So they're
Yeah.
separate. And so it's important to me that you feel like Rogue Sun is its own thing that stands alone separately. The connections to Radiant Black happen outside it, not in
Hmm.
it, if that makes sense.
Got you.
And so, like, I did some passes on some designs for the Rogue Sun logo, and we didn't go with any of them. We went with a logo by the incredible Phonographics. If you can get a logo by Phonographics, do not bother with a logo by me. Like, there's a reason that he is the genius that he is. And then from there, it was just, we've worked out what I know what the insides of that book are going to look like, and it's different to Radiant Black, and that's both because Ryan and Abel are different people to Kyle and Marcelo, and
Mm.
so like they have different tastes and they want the books to look different, and also to make sure it feels like its own thing.
Mm. No, that's interesting. Yeah, because it's something that I was just like considering. I just don't know how you'd even like what even the work goes into like editing and Do you design Rogue Sun? Is the design inside of Rogue Sun yours, or is that?
Yeah, the inside design of Rogue Sun will all be me.
Yeah, cool.
Some of that's done, some of it's still in progress. But
All right.
yeah, on a month-to-month basis, that's all my responsibility.
Cool. Yeah, because I was just thinking about I wonder what the work goes into managing two books that have crossed over, potentially set in the same world, that sort of thing. If what the thought process behind it is, but that makes sense. Yeah, the idea of they're separate and can be enjoyed on their own. So you want the design to be enjoyable, regardless of each other.
I will tell you a secret. They do both use the same underlying page grid.
Right.
It's like a 3-column grid with a baseline grid that I have set up. And I think if there were other books in that universe in the future, hypothetically, I would probably use that again. That's not something that anyone will ever notice reading the book. And honestly, for me, it's just we save over the Radiant Black file with the first Rogue Sun. It's just, I've already done that work. But I think if one day in the future I have books that are outside of this thing, I think I would maybe separate grid, separate.
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing that you might not notice, but maybe you'll feel.
Yeah.
If I'm lucky.
Yeah. I think I remember there's a quote where it's you might not notice it, but your brain did.
Exactly. That's the dream.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we'll keep an eye out for the 3-column text grid in any of your upcoming books.
Good luck.
Do you have any advice for designers looking to either break in or just anything that you wish you could tell a younger designer to keep an eye out for in their work?
That's interesting. I went to university for design. I am a qualified graphic designer. Here's what I think, and I don't know how much I believe this because I've sort of just thought of it, but
okay,
I kind of think that all design is stealing.
Right.
Design is cultural in a lot of ways. If you're trying to create a sort of mood, you sort of have to look at how other people have created that mood and try and do similar things, because that's how people have associations to ideas and styles and designs. And so the only piece of advice that I have is you have to read widely. You have to steal. If you are going to be stealing from people, steal from as many people, and good people who are good, people who you don't like, but there is something in their work that you can take and use. If you steal from one person, that's stealing. If you steal from 30 people, that's design.
That's a good quote.
I think I may have stolen it from someone. I don't know for sure.
Well, that's design.
Yeah, possibly. And so, yeah, I think just always dive a step further than you think you need to. Always go one page further in the Google results. Even if it doesn't work for this, maybe you see, I did a lot of research into stuff that is a certain type of design for Radiant Black really early on, because maybe that was going to be the look, and that wasn't the look. But I'm talking with someone about a book that is very, very far away. It's at least a year away. I'm not stressing about it, but we're talking about ideas, and I think it will look like some of that stuff.
Got you.
And so that stuff is useful to have looked at, even though I didn't use it. And also, if you want to get into designing comics, please do. There's not enough good designers in comics.
Got you.
And I don't there are lots of good designers in comics. I'm not going to sit here and list people, but especially because some of them are my friends and that would feel weird. But there's lots of good designers in comics, but there's lots more comics. And so I want to believe that there is room for you at the table if you want to do it. Please take some work off my hands. I'm so busy.
That's a good call to action. I have one more question about Radiant Black that's on my mind.
Hit me.
In issue 4, there's a sequence. I think it's the first page in issue 4 where the text goes from English to the Radiant language.
Yep.
I just remember thinking like, wow, the lettering in this book is incredible. Like, like really, really amazing lettering in that issue. And I know you don't do the lettering, but how much of that was just straight up the letterer? How much of it was like in the script?
I'm gonna bring up my copy of issue 4 just to make sure that I'm
Cool.
looking at exactly the right. But while I do that, I will say Becca, our letterer, is I think like a year from now, 2 years from now, I think that people will talk about her in the way they talk about the greats. Like,
Yeah,
I think Becca is a genius waiting to be spotted by everyone.
100%.
She was recommended to us by Kyle's worked with Clayton Cowles on a bunch of stuff before and went to Clayton for this book, and Clayton said, I just didn't have time to do it, but there's this new person who I've been working with and talking to, Becca, would she be good? And truly every new issue she figures out some new way to just blow me away. She's spectacular. This was not... So previously we had established that there is a Radiant language. Kyle came to me one afternoon and said, I think that there should be like a Radiant language. And I came back to him, I think 24 hours later, with this Radiant language in a font file ready for everyone to use.
Cool.
Because part of being the editor is solving problems like that. And I'm a huge nerd who wanted to do a new alphabet. So I did that, and I sent it to Becca. And I think in issue... I don't remember if it shows up in issue 1. It definitely shows up in issue 2. And so Kyle normally calls it out in the script. It's like Nathan brackets Radiant, and that's how Becca knows to do that. This transition on page 1, it wasn't in the script. The script just had the dialogue cutting off as this thing hit Nathan. And I looked at it, and my jaw dropped. And Becca, that's all Becca. She did it. It's 100% her.
So
She's
good.
a genius.
Yeah.
I don't, even looking at it now, I'm like, I know how she got there because I'm looking at it on the page, but she's a genius. I cannot say enough nice things about Becca, but please don't hire her for things because I want her on every book I work.
Yeah, no, so cool. Like, this issue, like I said, there's so much cool stuff with the lettering. A usually ignored part of underappreciated part of the creative process, but like when it stands out, it stands out. And I definitely think that this issue is like a great example of like here's how to do really cool stuff with like lettering.
Yeah, she's real good. It's truly just like I don't remember if I've told this story before. So the design pages for Radiant Black existed before the finished letters on issue 1. Was the order. Like Becca had lettered the preview pages, but not the rest of it. And so I had designed these sort of like little elements and bits that go all over the place. And one night Kyle just sends me the first finished lettered book. And I open it and there's this location caption. And it's like, first of all, it's a very nice location caption. And above it, like, Becca has seen what I was doing in the design, grabbed it, translated it to fit her purposes, and put it so that the whole book feels like a coherent book. I cried looking at these letters. Because it's so nice to work with people who get it and who will go the extra mile to make it all work together.
No, for sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It just comes together like so seamlessly. Like I didn't even consider that. Of course, those little boxes and that are done by someone else. But
exactly,
yeah, like they just fit so well together.
Because that's the thing, right? You, the reader, kind of shouldn't.
Yeah,
like that's our problem to deal with, and so if it should feel cohesive in the same way that sometimes you see a comic where clearly the writer and the artist weren't quite on the same page.
Yeah.
Whereas like Kyle and Marcelo talk constantly. All the time I get messages like, so we had a conversation and this is what's going to happen. And it's like, cool, great, because it takes it off my plate. It's it's really nice to work together with a bunch of people,
Got you.
even though
Yeah.
we're all on different continents.
Yeah, it's got to be tough. It's tough trying to like communicate with my mates who are just like a half-hour train away. Never mind different continents.
Yeah, we've got it's been a year. We've gotten pretty good at it.
Yeah, fair enough.
But that's part of my job is, I have to make sure that if we need something by a certain date and it's going to Becca in Ireland, like she's in a different time zone, the work will happen at a different time.
Yeah.
And that's part of being an editor.
Yeah, I remember reading, I think it was in issue 9, or it might have been issue 8, someone asked you in the letters column, like, what do you do? Like, what's your, like, average day? And then, like, the entire letters column was you trying to explain, like, what is it you do throughout the day?
I maybe regret venting quite that hard in the letters column quite that early. I if I'm remembering correctly, it was just a hard week. And it was just, someone sent an email where they were like, so what's your job? I was like, well, all right, strap in. You want to know what my job is? The truth is that my job is 30,000 different, like, I manage our website because in a previous life, I was a web developer. And so I built the Radiant Black website and I make sure that it's got all the up-to-date stuff. Thank you. And that's just like, that's not part of most other editors' jobs, but I can do it as part of mine. And, it's just picking up the bits where you can. My dream is a world where Kyle can focus on writing scripts and Marcelo can focus on drawing pages, and a colorist can color, or Marcelo can color himself, and Becca can letter, and they don't ever have to think about what goes on the website, because that's other stuff. That's side stuff. That's not making a comic. We'll get there, maybe. Or we won't. I've been here a year. I don't know what's going to happen. I might not be editing any books this time next year. It seems unlikely because I have a lot of them. But for as long as I'm here, I'm going to try and be as helpful as I can. That's what I'm here for.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I think you're doing a great job. I think a lot of people would agree. Like, that for a first-time editing and designing job on Radiant Black, I think you're doing great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think that's a nice place to wrap it up, really.
Great.
Where could we find you online?
Best place to find me is probably on my Twitter. I'm at @m_Busuttil. If you go to twitter.com/radiantblk, that's the book's Twitter account. And so you can, I'll end up tagged in something there. It might be easier for you to find. I have a podcast, Ranger Danger Podcast. We watch episodes of Power Rangers, then we talk about it. We're 8 years in. That's about halfway. They've made so much of this show. I'm not joking. That's the main places. Yeah.
Cool. All right, wonderful. Yeah, we'll put the links in the description and stuff like that.
Great.
But thank you so much for coming on. It's been really, really eye-opening.
Anytime. Look, honestly, if people have more questions, please tweet at me. I have Twitter open all the time. It's unhealthy, but it's 2021. We all know what it's like. So yeah, if you want to know anything about the job, please shoot me a tweet and I will happily tell you.
We're all terminally online at this point. You know, like, we've been stuck indoors.
You never know what's going to happen. Sometimes I wake up and it's like, hey, 7 insane things have happened while you were asleep. And it's like, yeah, cool. I'm going back to bed for a bit, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I get you. But no, yeah, thank you very much.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tom Talks 2. I really do think this might be one of my favourite ones so far, just for how different it is and how much I learned about the process over Image Comics to be an editor and a designer. Massive thanks to Michael for taking the time out of his busy schedule to sit down and talk to me about the whole thing. If you'd like to follow his Twitter, the link is in the description below. And if you want to follow what we're up to at Coco Comics, you can follow us on Twitter also at Coco Comics. Or you can follow me personally at Phillips and Thomas, where I spout all sorts of nonsense. If you have any suggestions for who I should talk to next time, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks for sticking to the end, and I'll see you next time.